Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. You can check out our show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com. And this is episode 348. And I'm your host, Pilar Orti. Hello, welcome. If we haven't met before, I hope you enjoy this episode. And today's episode, I have to very sheepishly say that I recorded this conversation with my wonderful guest back in October. And this has happened to me recently, and it's that, I have to say, like many podcasters, I've ended up with a lot of conversations in my hard drive waiting for them to be released. I go through periods where I just go, oh, this person. And I just go through periods where I meet a lot of people and I think, oh, it would be great for them to meet my listeners as well. And so we get behind the microphone. Of course, they agree very kindly to record. And then I end up with lots of conversations. But I'm actually really pleased that this conversation waited. It waited a little bit to be released as part of the new topic thing for this show, which is focusing more on the general world of work and how our attitudes to work are changing, not as much only about remote work. So our guest today, in case you're on the edges of your seat for the suspense, our guest is Barbara Mutedzi, and she is a conscious leadership coach. So in today's episode, we talk a little bit about how her work underpinned a shift to remote work and how she helped a group of managers in Zimbabwe consolidate remote work. But it goes beyond that, and it's actually about building the foundations of your leadership regardless of where you are, whether you're co-located or not. But of course, as one of the things we come to right at the end of the conversation is that when we shift to remote work, everything gets amplified. So it's almost like our foundations have to be even more solid as a leader and as a team. So really interesting as well to have someone who could talk about how the world of work in organizations is experienced in a completely different part of the world to that where I am, which I'm used to. So she talks about the experience in Zimbabwe, how organizational hierarchies are viewed. And we also touch a little bit on education, which is, again, another of my favorite topics. So we talk also about the psychology of change as we discussed near the end, do we change or could we change as people when we start to work away from each other? Is our location in relation to others part of our identity? So fantastic questions. I am very grateful to Barbara for stopping by. And listeners, well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. As always, one of the joys of this show is that I get to meet people from all over the world who come to work life from different angles, different points of view. And so I am delighted to welcome today Barbara Mutedzi, who is a conscious leadership coach who works mainly with leaders and small business owners. So welcome, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Pilar. Thank you. I am looking forward to today's conversation.
So am I, because we're going to be looking at how things are happening in a side of the world that I have no connection with. So that's exciting. But before we go there to your work, I'm very curious about what is conscious leadership, and also just about you in general, and a little bit about the work you do and also where you are in the world at the moment. Just a little bit about that. So let's start with, I don't know where to start. I'll let you start wherever you want to start.
So I'm currently based in Bali. I am teaching at a local university here that has or is in partnership with a Netherlands-based university that brings its students to Bali to do a 10-week program on inspirational coaching and leadership, on mindful leadership, and I also guest lecture in entrepreneurship in action, as well as business consultancy. My background is as a conscious leadership coach, and I'm trained in neuroscience based coaching. And all of that leads to me working with leaders and business owners and helping them cultivate what I'll explain as the conscious leadership skills. And those help them create conducive environments for the people that they lead to actually step in and flourish, which means there's higher performance, there's higher impact, and in the long run, a higher return on investment. And if I'm to shorten the definition of conscious leadership, it's really about understanding who you are as a leader first, right? Because we can never lead other people beyond where we are. And it's not about the title of leadership. It's who are you as a human being? What makes you tick? Why are you who you are? And when you do that deeper work of self-reflection, self-inquiry, really understand who you are, it increases your emotional intelligence. And with that, you're able to now create spaces where other people can do the same, and just lead people toward a common strategy, a common vision, so that everyone is involved in the business, the products, the services that you're offering the world. So yeah, that's how I can summarize it for now.
That's great. I've got a question about that before we get into the main,
Yeah.
which is, do you find any, well, actually, how often do you find resistance to what sounds to me like quite an introspective and deep work into oneself? Well, we might not be expecting to have to do that as part of our job.
Mm. It is very hard because looking into yourself beyond our social roles, and when I say social roles, I mean our titles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leader of whatever sort, a man, a woman, however we've taken on the social roles. It is so difficult to look under the covers because we haven't been naturally taught how to do that in our businesses. My PhD is actually on conscious business ethics, and it all starts with self-awareness. So the people that I do work with are people who are ready to do that. They are probably doing very well in their businesses, but they still feel like there's something missing. And it's usually the human element. And the human element is, it really starts about asking, who am I? Why am I here? And when those questions are continually asked genuinely and authentically, it makes the job at hand easier, because the more you know yourself, the more you're aware of your strengths, your weaknesses, who you are as a physical human being, emotionally, psychologically, all of that, it then makes it easy for you to move forward with a deeper knowing of how best you can serve the people you're leading, or how best you can serve your customers. And it becomes genuine and authentic. And that is one thing that has been missing in the world for such a long time, because we've just looked at making a profit in business, which is important because businesses are there to make money through the products and services, because the money we'll make will allow us to be of service to the people that we do lead, serve, or look after around the world. So that is an important element. However, the human element has been missing a lot. And for us to serve other humans, we have to understand ourselves as the humans. And the more you know yourself, the easier it is to really see how amazing and how wonderful we all are, and the skill sets that we'll have will become even more refined. And as a business owner, as a leader, it makes it easy to pivot in times, for example, turbulent times, whether there's a war in the country, whether the pandemic happens, whatever happens on the outside, because you know who you are. And if you take that extra step to know your purpose and link it to the vision of your business, it makes it very easy to know, okay, the end goal is that, and there are different ways to get there.
Yeah. Nice. And I'm very happy to look at what we're going to talk about through that lens as well, because we are going to look at some work you did around remote work, around helping managers and in Zimbabwe specifically lead their teams remotely. And what you're saying, I think, is another part that's been missing from the conversation about going remote. We had a lot of this, we had a lot of talk about empathy, being empathetic, really emotional intelligence during the pandemic specifically because of the very specific nature of that. And then when we're coming out the other side, it seems like we're forgetting that actually we do need a lot more self-awareness when we are remote, either as team members or leaders and managers as well. So I'm very happy to bring any of that we need to into the conversation, because I think it's very, very important. So as I mentioned, you got in touch and you let me know that you'd done this piece of work. Shall we look at, in fact, let's go back a bit. Let's go before. What is the work culture like in Zimbabwe? And specifically, what was the profile like of remote work, or what is the profile of remote work now? Whatever you think is more relevant.
So before the pandemic, remote work was something that was distant. We had no understanding of it at all when I looked at the organizations that I worked with at that time. And so when the pandemic hit, it was a real struggle. There was panic. Most of the organizations I was working with had a structure of top-down hierarchy, where the leader, who's literally not the leader but a boss, because there's a difference between a boss and a leader. A boss says, "I know everything. The buck stops with me. We can't move in any direction unless I say yes or no." And so when the pandemic hit, what happened was we were all now working from home, and there was panic, because now how do we get hold of the boss? We can't just walk into his office, because Zimbabwe is a low to medium income country, leaning more to low income at the moment. A lot of the employees, some of them did not even have gadgets to be able to communicate online through their computer. That's number one. Two, we have spaces that are called high density areas and low density areas. Low density areas are people middle class, high class. They have access to these resources. Having a computer or a number of computers in the household is natural. Having access to internet and Wi-Fi is an everyday thing. And then you have those in high density areas where there are not even internet cables in their community. And all these people, yes, they commuted to work, so it was easy for them to be at the office. The office is all kitted out. But then when we had to work from home, how do you work in a team when other people have access to computers and others don't? Or even if we do have access to phones, the rates are very high on how to maintain long conversations on your phone. So it's also a structural thing where we just had this mentality of we are having to go physically to a building to work. And so working from home caused a lot of panic, rightfully so. And one of the other reasons is because companies are so focused on making a profit and not so much about equipping their people in the right way to allow them to work from anywhere in the world, and to trust them as well, to say, I don't need to micromanage. So the culture was so much like, as a manager, I need to see you by your desk 8 to 5. I don't care what you're doing on the computer, just be at work 8 to 5. I need to physically see you. And that kind of fear-based leadership is not sustainable, especially in turbulent times. And so there was a lot of panic in the beginning. A lot of companies were really worried about losing income, and they did. And it unfortunately took them a long time to do the pivot. So when I started working with them, it was really about, if our foundation is strong enough, we can pivot in any way. So even before we get to conscious leadership, let's start with your foundation. Because if you think of a house, if the foundation is not so strong, if there's a wind or, a tsunami or whatever it is that happens in nature, it's going to be very difficult for that house to stand for a long period of time. Now, when I talk about a foundation of a business, what it is your business strategy. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and I can break down the business strategy into 5 simple things. So if you're a remote company or you're thinking of leading a remote team, these 5 questions are really important. What's the purpose of the business? Why are we here as a business? That's important, right? And then from there, what's our vision? Which means in the next 2, 5, or 10 years, you can choose whichever number. What is our biggest vision? What do we want to accomplish along our purpose in however many number of years? Number 3 is the mission. Now that we know we want to accomplish this in the next 2, 5, or 10 years, how do we break that down into actual activities that we need to do monthly, quarterly, weekly, daily? So that's your mission activities. And then the values are, how are we going to actually do the activities? How are we going to embody them? So instead of memorizing the values, because in Zimbabwe you would walk into an office and they have a lovely mission statement on the wall, they have all their values on the wall, but it's just on the wall and we can memorize them, but we're not actually embodying them in the way that we are providing the services. So that's as important, because it builds the character of your products, of your services, right? And then the implementation plan is number 5. And what the implementation plan does, it takes the mission activities, what you really want to do. It then matches up with the dates that those things need to be done by. And then the third thing, it matches with the resources that you currently have in your business, as opposed to waiting for more income or waiting for more resources. How can we be resourceful with the resources we currently have? And that also means your staff, because they are also resources and everyone has a different skill set. So once that foundation is clear and clarified, it makes it easy to now lead your people, right? Lead with your people and say, this is what we would like to accomplish. What do you think? How can we make sure that at the end of the day, at the end of the year, we have reached our purpose and we have reached our vision? And then it makes it easy for you to cultivate environments where your people feel safe to be able to work from anywhere, because they already know what the activities need to be done, the resources that are currently there, and also the timeline. So as leaders and business owners, if your strategy is clear, it's transparent, and it's transferable to everyone in the organization, you don't now have to micromanage people and be wanting to see people at the desk 8 to 5, because you've been able to communicate that. So conscious leadership also now comes in. How do I communicate to other people? And that comes from, how do I communicate to myself? And that goes back to self-awareness, right? And self-awareness comes from a deep self-inquiry. And when we talk about self-awareness, we don't go and get self-awareness. Self-awareness is the result of that self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is asking and questioning everything about who you are and everything that you do. Even with emotional intelligence, we don't go and get emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the result of the self-awareness. So it's constant work. And the more you know yourself and you've experienced the self-inquiry, it makes it so easy for you to allow other people to walk that path without even trying, because you embody that within you. So those two things, the foundation is very important, and being able to communicate that to other people is very important as well.
So what do you think, what did you find were the key mindset shifts to be able to absorb all of that? And I know that we're really summarizing. And go, yeah, but I'm not in an office anymore. How do I do this? What are the key mindset shifts did you see or that you came across?
So at that time, what I also realized was there's a big poverty mindset. And I find that in organizations that are really focused on profit, much more than anything else, is they're worried about, we don't want to lose money. And so because if we lose money, something is going to happen. So there's this poverty mindset of saying there's not enough resources. And it goes back to your mission activities. Instead of looking at, I'm going to lose money, let's be resourceful, number one, with what we currently have, right? Number two, yes, we were in office buildings, but if you think about it, how can we transfer all the money that we pay, for example, in utility bills? Because during COVID, people were now working from home. So that what that did was that they weren't using as much electricity at the office, because not so many people were at the office. They weren't using so much water. If you go down to the nitty gritties, they weren't using a lot of the teas and coffees and boiling water and all of that. Wear and tear of gadgets and office furniture was very low. So it was easy for them to then look at the expenses that they had before COVID and then transfer that chunk of money that wasn't going into that building into, how do we upskill our people? How do we provide them with the gadgets that they need at home? How do we maybe have satellite offices as opposed to having one office building that people come into? And even when you look at the people themselves working from home, they're not having to commute to work anymore. So you have to train them to say, let's look at your own budget. You're not having to commute, which means you have more time with your family, or you can use that money from commuting into creating a home office in whichever way that looks like. And perhaps instead of, if you don't have space at home, again, it goes back to those satellite offices. Instead of putting money into one big building, how can the organization look for spaces that employees can go work at? So whether it's working hubs, where they do and can find those resources. So it's really about just looking at your budgets and now saying, what did we use in the past? How can we become more resourceful with that and move it into a space that allows us to equip our people so that they don't go into a poverty mindset of, oh my goodness, things are bad, because it's something that we don't understand. So, if I'm to bring neuroscience into it, if we're to try a new habit, for example, or a new thing, our brain is built to protect us, whether it's a good or a bad thing. So, when we are needing to use so much energy, our brain says, no, 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 but we've been doing this past thing for so long, whether it's good for you or not. Now
Yeah.
you're wanting to shift, there's something wrong, there's danger, right? So the mindset shift is having leaders who are self-aware enough to understand also how their own bodies work so that they can then speak to their people and say, this is how we are going to help you. This is how we are going to protect you. This is how we are going to support you. So that communication is very important. And again, just going back to understanding human nature, human psychology, how our mind and brains work, because all it is increasing trust in our employees, in the people that we lead, serve, or look after. And the more we can do that, the way we can do that is by just giving them as much information as is possible, so that they don't feel like they are under attack, because that's how our body will behave. It will, as much as is possible, try and make us use less energy, because our brain uses quite a lot of energy. And it does not only stop at the staff, it also goes through to the customers, because customers also panicked, right? Because you're so used to going into the bank to see a human being who can serve you, and now I can't even access that. And I'm so used to seeing a human being, now I have to do everything online. I don't have the proper gadgets. My internet is not so great. I have to go to another person's house to do that. So it's all of these things where the more we are informing our clients and customers as well on what is going on, whether through newsletters or groups that are set up, it makes it so much easier to pivot in times where the world is changing and we're needing to make sure that, yes, the profit is coming in, but we're also supporting everyone around us. And that always goes back to self-awareness. And I know that we're using Zimbabwe as an example. But for those who are listening, this kind of mindset is prevalent in spaces where there's low resources, and poverty mindset and fear-based leadership have been the norm of doing business. So it can be anywhere in the world. And it's really about understanding that our minds are very powerful. Our minds are made out of words and sentences and thoughts that we have accumulated over the years, which were also produced by other human beings. And the more we question everything, that self-inquiry, the more we're able to see, who we really are and how we can cultivate things moving forward a little bit better toward a higher level of living and consciousness.
Just going back and looking at what it is that we've got and how we're going to allocate our resources now that we are working in different ways speaks volumes, because one, it says we're accepting the situation and we're accepting that we need to work differently. And the first way in which we're going to work differently is by using our resources differently. And I think that
Yes.
really speaks volumes to the team, because that can then go into the team saying, now you might need to use your own resources if you've got direct contact with clients, or if, as you say, if you're involved in communication with clients, you've got to use what you got in a different way. So that's it. Don't rely. Before, we were very human when people came to see us in person. Right now, we need to do our other stuff differently, because that's not there anymore. We can't rely on that. So I think that, putting your money with your mouth is, which is this resource allocation thing, speaks volumes. And as you're saying,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
looking at this, there's a big communication piece. because we almost need to, it's almost like pressing a restart and going, yeah, so why are we here? What's our value? What's our mission? How do we operate? What are our values? So in what ways is this then different when we are away from each other, and especially, like you're saying, in an environment where even our team members have different resources? How do we start shifting how we communicate all this? Or how do we, I don't know, there's a big shift, I think, between being in person with your people and addressing these things when we have a co-located culture than when people start to be away. What are some of the shifts that you think we need to be making?
Because of this top-down kind of fear-based leadership, there's almost a persona that people have developed that is untrue to who they are. And one of the things that I've loved seeing over the couple of years during the pandemic and afterwards is that people have now really seen that we're all actually human, because now you can see you're literally in people's living rooms. And so being in that space and allowing that to happen, and having even coffee meets, it doesn't have to be a formal meeting all the time, because when you're changing things, as much as you might communicate, there's still a stress factor. So having spaces where we're not only going on Zoom or any other platform just to talk about work. It's, I really want to hear what's going on in your life. And that is the type of leadership that is more, that leads more into coaching. You are coaching people by providing a space where they feel comfortable to speak up. And the result of that is that people feel seen and heard and understood. So you're creating psychological safety. And the more people feel like they're being seen as who they are, the easier it is for them to let go of the personas that they've had to create when they had to go to a physical building to work. Because when you're going to work, you have to put on your suit on, whatever attire you have to put in to go into the office, depending on the type of office. So it allows people to relax a bit more. So it's upon the leader, and I know I am answering this question in a roundabout way. It is really up to the leader to see the other person as a human being, as opposed to just a thing that you can move around on a chessboard, if I can call it that. Because once you do that, it really makes it easy for people to open up and say, hey, this is how I can actually support the organization. I know you said we can do it this way, but here are other ideas. But the more that we do this top-down way of leadership, it makes it very hard for people to open up, because they have to wait for the boss to say yay or nay. And the more you get to know your people, the more you can actually work with them to train other people who don't have those skills. So, for example, the IT department in the past used to be right at the back of the office building, right? Or in the dungeon or wherever. But now they need to be upfront, because everything is now online. So they become the trainers of the organization. So leadership changes in terms of what skills are needed at whatever time. So the IT department became quite important during the pandemic. So how do they become the leaders of the shift for a period of time? After that's done, how do we then get people who are talent focused? Not so much HR, because HR in low resource spaces is really just pushing paper around. It's not about really understanding human beings. It's about contracts and leave days and all of that, which again dehumanizes people. But how do we now bring people who are talented within the organization around emotional intelligence, around the soft skills, empathy, around mental health, around stress and all of that? So it's really about having self-managed teams. And that goes back to really understanding and having those conversations with your people. And that might feel like productivity is slowing down, but this is part of building the foundation. Because once you've built the foundation of making sure everyone feels seen, heard, and understood, they're able to then see how they can contribute. They're actually able to contribute more, because they're using the skills that you've hired them for, to actually contribute to the common vision. That's if you've hired correctly, because that's another conversation,
Yes.
right? But it's all of that. So it's in the beginning, yes, in any pivot that happens, it slows things down a little bit until you find your feet, until you build another foundation. Then you launch whatever you need to launch. But if we run forward without setting that foundation, it's going to be really hard even to communicate that to others. And obviously, the earlier you do it, the better, because then once you know how to set a foundation for one tragic event, if I can call it that, it makes it easy to pivot on the other ones because you've had this experience.
I think you're touching on a lot of things that are missing in creating the sustainable remote work in organizations. And in some organizations, as you say, it's much more difficult than in others, because if you've got a hierarchical structure, if you've got a structure and a culture of some departments are more important than others, if you've got a culture of, let's say, managers and senior leaders taking on a certain persona, the remote space does not take all of that very well. It makes it very visible. So I think it's really, yeah, that's what you're needing to break that down. I think as well,
Yeah.
one thing that came to mind as you were talking, which I hadn't thought of, is in the same way as we have some visible personas at work, we might adapt certain other personas when we're away from each other. And that's really interesting as well, that checking in of, are we someone different? Just because of comfort, it's part of that self-awareness, I think, is, am I changing just that awareness? Am I changing my style or what I do just because of distance? And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. Yeah. Really interesting.
Yeah, no, and that makes it difficult, right? That journey. And so we also have to be compassionate to leaders who are having to go through this. And even leaders who are leading in a fear-based manner, that's also all they know on the most part. And so we really have to be compassionate and conscious of that, and to be as open and supportive as we can, and to provide, for me, I've got like a 6-month coaching program, which really allows them to feel held and seen and understood as a leader. Because if you've been in a space where, everyone has to come to you for the answers because that's all you know, that's also a scary space to be in, because no one has all the answers. There's no way that one person can have an answer for the entire organization. So that's hard. And one of the things that I did find in Zimbabwe was, and I don't know if it's the same in the UK. I think it is, because Zimbabwe was colonized by the British. But there's O level and then there's A level. So by the time you're at O level, which is Form 4, when you're 16 years old, you are expected to know what you need to be doing for A level, which is at the ages of 17 and 18, your last 2 years of high school. And then from that, the subjects that you get at A level, that you choose at A level, are the ones that will get you into the university that you want to get in, or the program that you want to get in university. And now that's too much pressure for any 16-year-old to start deciding what they want to do. And so people choose subjects because either their parents said, oh no, choose this career because that's what we want to pay for, or that's where you get more money in the future. Because in the past, people would stay in jobs for 50, 60 years, and now things are changing so rapidly. And so you get a person who chooses a subject without having all the information, without being mature enough as well to make that decision. They go into A level with these subjects. They are then forced to go and choose a degree because that's the only one they can do, or they have less choice because of the subjects they chose when they were 16. And then they do so well in that university degree because the way that the school system is developed is, as long as you can memorize every single thing in the textbook in the past, then you will pass, right? You just go and regurgitate the same information into your exam. And so you do well, and people celebrate you for doing that. But actually, critical analysis is not there because all you're doing is just regurgitating the same information that's in the textbook. You go to work in a space where it's top down. You don't have to think because the boss is the one who answers everything for you. You just have to do what the boss says. And as long as you color within the lines, then you'll get promoted. And what I found working with leaders and business owners, like in their 40s or 50s, they've ticked all the boxes. They've got the house, they've got the big cars, they've done what they're supposed to do from the time they were 16 until they're 40, and they're stressed, and they're done with life. But there's nowhere else to go because they don't know how else to lead. That's all they've known. and they've been led by other people's rules and regulations as well. And so having to unpack that and go back all the way to when you're 16. I mean, Richard Rudd, he talks about between the ages of 8 and 14 is when things are cemented emotionally in your body. So when we do conscious leadership, it's going all the way back then. And so if you've been living a life where society, who is not a dark old building downtown, society is other people, um, it's going to be very difficult to allow the people that you lead to say, hey, no, this is not the way we should go if we want this result. How about we do this? And this is why millennials are having a hard time in organizations, because they are online. They can see the many possibilities. But the older generations are struggling because they're saying, no, 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 we should be telling you what you need to do, even though it's the right or the wrong thing or whatever. So there's a gap between the communication. And so communication really starts with yourself as a leader, because that's the only way you'll be able to speak to anyone of any age in your organization, because your organization is going to have people from different cultures and traditions, and diversity and inclusion is so important right now because the world is opened up so much. And so being compassionate to people of all ages, because of what they've been exposed to in the way they've grown up from as young as 8 or even all the way from the time they were born, is very important when it comes to conscious leadership. Because when we move through the world, we have this lens that we have, and that lens is determined by all the life experiences we've had. And so we interact with our universe or our world or our businesses through that lens.
Where now? I mean, what is where next? I mean, where do we go next? Do you think in the way that just challenging where we work from has potentially unpacked so much and opened up so many other conversations, as you say, not just about can we work from anywhere, who can work from a laptop, but or even what resources people have, but actually you touched upon how we bring up young people in society. You've touched upon how we are replicating or not society's norms at work. If there is a disjoint between what we are expecting socially from what we are finding at work, right to the how we are communicating with our clients, if we are in direct contact with them or with the outside world. I don't know, what are your thoughts about what might happen next? I mean, there is just so much stuff that we need to be paying attention to, and it's probably, I don't know, what should we be paying attention to next, given that there's so much stuff?
So there's a business leader that I used to work for a while ago, and one of the things that I remember him saying, he said that business is life. And in the beginning, I didn't understand that, but with time, I really understood that. I got a degree in metaphysics, and the way that I understood that is that whether we are in a family or a business or a community or a country, everything that's happening in there is a replication of life itself. And wherever there is chaos, whatever we call chaos, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's war, what a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, all of that, whatever chaos that's there, that's an opportunity to create. Because if we use biomimicry, nature, for example, if you go down and burn a forest, hopefully we're not burning any forests, but if we use that as an example, if you burn down a forest, there's new growth that comes out, which is nice and green and lush. And so as human beings, it's our nature to be afraid when there's chaos because we get very comfortable in comfortable spaces. But if we go back even to just cellular structures of our own bodies, we are what we eat, right? And so when we eat, we break down the food, it goes down into pieces. There's chaos because we're munching all this food down. But in that, the body is taking in the nutrients and the proteins and everything that we need to build who we are. And so when there's any form of chaos, I know that our brains are built to protect us. But that's an opportunity if we remember that there's new growth that's coming up. And as long as we just ride the wave, whatever that wave is, the easier it is. And the more that we go back to making sure that our strategy, our foundation is as strong as it can be at any one period. It gives us a sense of purpose because we know at least we are getting to some sort of destination and that there's so many ways to get to that destination. And breaking down this top-down hierarchical structure, which has broken down already. It has broken down already because of globalization and even all the way back to colonization. It's broken down already. And the more we can embrace that each of us has so many more talents beyond the certifications that we have. And when we can have conversations in community of saying, what makes you tick? What do you feel like doing? And how can you bring that into the space that we're in? I can give you an example. In Nelson Mandela's book, The Long Walk to Freedom, he talks about how he learned how his father led. And the way that he led was that if there was a dispute in the community, he would bring everyone together. They would all sit in a circle. He wasn't sort of at the head of the table. Everyone would sit in a circle together at the same level. And everyone would say what they needed to say before the leader said anything. And by the time that the conversation got back to the leader, the story or the challenge was half the time solved because everyone had an opportunity to speak up, because everyone just wants to be heard. Let's listen to each other. That's active listening, empathetic listening. That's all it is. We are only wanting to be listened to and to be understood. And when we are listened to and understood, we're able to then offer that to other people. And so that's the opening up of, oh, this is chaotic. I'm not used to this. I'm used to be the one who says all the answers. It's no. You can lighten the load on yourself. Allow other people to speak. All you're doing is guiding and coaching. And that takes time on also taking the time to really listen to your own self as a leader, as a coach, as whatever it is, a business owner. And that's hard, but you have to cultivate the time and the space to do that. So don't shy away from chaos because there's an opportunity for growth that you might not be aware of. But one thing, if you really want to be grounded, is to just make sure that your foundation is as stable and as clear as you can be at any one time. And that will give you at least that trust within yourself to say, okay, at least we've got something that we're working toward. And then that will allow us to pivot and to be open enough to just see what we can do moving forward.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara Mutedzi. Listeners, you can connect with her on LinkedIn. I'll stick the link in the show notes. But if you want to look for her, Barbara Mutedzi. And well, I hope you enjoyed this. I love talking about how our mindset is changing around business and leadership, about the intersection between our work selves and our selves, and remembering we are rounded humans that even at work are affected by our lived experiences, and so that affects our collaboration. I mean, these are huge topics, and I hope we can tackle some more of these as well as some more technical ones. But for now, thank you very much for listening. I know there's loads of podcasts out there, so I am very grateful that you have spent some time with us today. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.